200 years ago, a young natural scientist traveled for 5 years throughout the Spanish colonies of South America. Such an ambitious scientific expedition had never before been attempted in the interior of the New World. On his return to Paris, tales of his exotic adventures in unknown jungles and on high Andean peaks captured the public's imagination and turned the scientific explorer into popular hero. Said at the time to be more famous than Napoleon. His name?
Alexander von Humboldt.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear friends, welcome.
He was the last of the universal men who looked at any phenomenon and didn't just say, how strange, but said why and how and what.
He is in our past, and yet in some ways, some important ways, we are only starting now to catch up with Humboldt.
I think he inspired people with his dedication, with his curiosity, and with his magnificent science.
Alexander von Humboldt was born into the German aristocracy in 1769. With his brother Wilhelm, he grew up on the family estate near Berlin. With his father's early death, family life became more difficult. The sensitive young Alexander would escape into a fantasy world of fiction and adventure, captivated by such stories as Robinson Crusoe and the maritime expeditions of Captain James Cook. In his heart, Alexander knew that he too was destined for adventure.
Since my earliest youth, I had an intense desire to travel in those distant lands which have been rarely visited by Europeans. This urge brought me to a moment when life appears a boundless horizon, and nothing attracted me more than the awakening of new emotions and the intense thrill of danger. But what drew me to the tropics was not just the promise of adventures, but a desire to see with my own eyes a grand and wild nature, and the prospect of collecting facts which might contribute to the progress of science.
Today, Humboldt's name is largely forgotten. And yet across the continents, features and places bear testimony to his once great fame. This story will rediscover the man who at the age of 29 set out for South America on an extraordinary adventure that would change the course of the history of science.
Monsieur von Humboldt, before your departure for the Americas, had you set out your intentions?
Yes, indeed. Let me quote from a letter written on the eve of our departure. I shall collect plants and animals. I will analyze heat, electricity, and the magnetic content of the atmosphere. I shall measure mountains. But my true purpose is to investigate the interaction of all the forces of nature. In other words, I must find out about the unity of nature.
He was looking for a way to connect all parts of nature, and nature to Humboldt included human beings. And that's important to realize, not only human beings as physical beings, but also our minds, our thoughts.
He wrote in his travel diary, "Everything is interaction. Alles ist Wechselwirkung." And that might indicate something of his idea of unity. To use all possible scientific methods, to use all kinds of instruments, but to be aware that a comprehensive view goes beyond measurement.
Humboldt set sail across the Atlantic for South America. With him traveled his companion and colleague, the French botanist Aimé Bonpland. Together, they had stowed on board the latest scientific equipment, intent on gathering as much information as they could about the natural world.
Humboldt was aware that in order to get an accurate picture of somewhere, you had to go there. You had to travel. So travel was part of the process of understanding. You couldn't simply understand from a library in Paris or Berlin or London. And he was very aware of that.
On the 16th of July, 1799, their ship arrived off the Venezuelan coast. Humboldt was overwhelmed.
The pinnated leaves of the palms stood out against a blue sky. There was no trace of mist. The sun climbed rapidly towards its zenith, spreading a dazzling light over a becalmed sea. The shore was abundant with pelicans, flamingos, and herons. The intense luminosity of the day, the vivid colors, the lush vegetation, and the variegated plumage of the birds all bore the grand seal of tropical nature.
For Humboldt to go out into the field and see the plants, see the animals in their own place, see the landscape, look at the blue of the sky and the color of the water and measure things, temperature, barometric pressure. Nobody had related all of these things together before, but again, to Humboldt, they were all part of that unity. So all information was potentially useful and part of the picture.
In the first 3 days, we could barely proceed with any true scientific work. We would pick up an object and within seconds reject it for a more striking one. Bonpland assured me that he would go stark raving mad if the excitement didn't stop soon. How bright the plumage of the birds, how colorful the fish. But more overpowering than any single object was the impression of the whole entire mass of vibrant and luscious vegetation. I knew I would be most happy in the days to come.
Here was the essence of Humboldt's approach. Beyond the description of new and isolated facts, Humboldt wanted to understand the processes at work in nature's grand design.
Science up to then, in its taxonomy and just listing, hadn't understood that the lists were all linked. And I think he was an early perceiver that behind all these lists, these many, many facts, just books were full of facts, there was some sort of harmony between them.
His stated goal at the outset is to see how forces interact in nature, and he's certainly laying the groundwork here for Darwin's theories. So he was always on the brink of finding larger answers.
The two colleagues took up residence in the lively port of Cumana and set about their studies. Atmospheric measurements, specimen collecting, descriptions, and illustrations. Within 3 months, they had collected some 1,600 plants, describing 600 species new to science. Humboldt made many drawings of these, along with other sketches of snails and shellfish. One of the excursions Humboldt and Bonpland made was a journey to the Caripe Valley. Their aim was to visit a spectacular cave, home to a unique nocturnal bird, the guacharo, much prized by the Indians for its oil.
At the foot of the tall Guacharo mountain, and only 400 steps from the cave, we still could not make out its entrance. The path follows a small winding stream. At the last bend, you suddenly come across the enormous grotto opening. We measured the way in by means of a cord and went about 430 feet. As the light began to fail, we heard the hoarse screams of the nocturnal birds that, according to the Indians, live only in these underground caves. It is difficult to give an idea of the dreadful noise made by thousands of these birds. It cannot be compared to the noise of crows. The guacharo's piercing scream reverberates against the rocky vault and echoes in the depths of the cave. The Indians showed us their nests by tying torches onto long poles. The further we penetrated into the cave, the more the frightened birds screamed.
It's creepy. You go into this extraordinary cave. Okay, we know what caves are like. And suddenly you hear this amazing, rattling, castanet-like call coming from the depths of the cave. And you go further in, and you go around a corner.